my friends. It's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and today we're going to start with an exercise where I say a word, an emotionally charged word at that, and then you are going to think about that word and take stock of what reaction that causes for you in your brain heart and see what this does to you. Ready? Today's emotionally charged word I want you to react to is bias. Bias. Where does that take your head? What does that do for you? It's bad, right? Or mostly bad? Wait, is it? No, let's game this thing out a little bit. Okay, places where bias is definitely bad. Well, it's bad if it makes you hate people, especially preemptively. So like, just racism or despising other people or whole groups of people. That would be a really negative expression of bias. That's bad. If you're biased in such a way that you're a dishonest judge or a dishonest witness lying about stuff, that would be bad. Dishonest in academic reporting, or for that matter, media reporting, like a dishonest journalist who lets bias inform what they do, that would be bad. That one's actually kind of funny because everybody says they don't want biased journalism. But if you look at where people consume media and consume news, apparently we all really want very biased journalism and absolutely nothing other than that. But in theory, we don't want biased journalism. We don't want biased politicians. We'd like people who lead to be loyal to the truth and loyal to the people and loyal to the law. And of course, generally speaking, in a two-party system, whichever party you like, they're the ones who do that. And whichever one you don't, they're the scoundrels who don't do that. In reality, probably absolute power does tend to corrupt absolutely. There have been good politicians in the world. I pray that there will be more. The point is, those are all examples of bias that we don't like, and I think rightly don't like. What are some examples of bias that we do like? Well, how about all knowledge? Aren't you biased by your experiences toward things that are true and good and that you've seen repeatedly work a certain way? And so you're like, that I favor that true thing over that false thing. It's kind of foundational to all knowledge of everything, right? We like bias in terms of our own personal safety and well-being, pretty much the things that we do. If we're thinking with common sense, we avoid dangerous things that hurt us and practices that aren't a very good idea because they always seem to end ruinously based on our experience. And we tend to run toward things that make more sense and produce better outcomes because it's less likely to be injurious. To some degree, bias just is experience, or it's born out of experience, and bias keeps humanity alive. Now, per the examples I gave a second ago, there's all kinds of bias that goes far beyond those boundaries and into mean, hateful, dishonest, deceitful, cheating kind of conduct. But somewhere in there, and maybe it's kind of a thick dividing line, I don't know, I got to think that through more. There is some sort of division between malignant bias that is destructive and healthy bias that is just almost another word for knowledge. But how about one that maybe is in the middle of that thick dividing line between the two that's a little bit tougher to sort through? How about nepotism? Obviously, nepotism on the surface is a very bad word. By that, I just mean favoritism, usually toward a family member. I think sometimes nepotism can mean favoritism toward people kind of in your circle or whatever. But theoretically, we're against that, especially when we think of it in politics or the market. We want good people to be in positions that affect our lives. We don't just want people's buddies or whatnot. Ulysses S. Grant, the president after the Civil War, he was a great general, but he was not a great president. And he just hired a bunch of his friends, and they were awful. We didn't like that very much. Harding was an awful president in the 20th century, and even he figured out close to the end of his term before maybe one of his friends actually discreetly killed him. He even figured out toward the end of his term that his problem wasn't his enemies. His problem was that he hired all of his friends. Nepotism that bit him in the butt. We don't like it when mommy and daddy's special boy gets the promotion and now they're running the thing instead of the more competent person. So in that regard, that kind of bias is bad. But what about toward your kid? What about toward your mom or dad? What about toward the person in your life who you love the most? Like maybe a little nepotism toward your husband or your wife or your kid or your parent. Maybe that would be okay. I mean, I have to imagine that a lot of people would give very noble answers if you were like, hey, two people are hanging over a cliff and they're too far apart and you can only save one. And one is your 8-year-old daughter and the other is some guy. Who do you save? I mean, I would hope, like probably most people are going to be like, my kid? Because the other person's going to get a vote when they ask their parent. So I guess I'm going to go with my kid. If you hook everybody up to a lie detector test, a lot more people are just going to admit their, can you call it nepotism in that horrible, bleak scenario that is the kind of thing that weirdly goes through my brain before I let my defenses down and go to sleep at night. But it's kind of a weird thing. If somebody came up to me and believably said, if you push this green button, your daughter will be wildly successful at life and have a life filled with happiness and joy and everything's going to work out great. If you push this yellow button, somebody you've never met or ever heard of will get all of that success instead, and they will be very happy. Well, if there's no face on it, you're just pushing the green button, even though, again, that is biased. Here's my point. I'm just trying to explore this sort of oddly murky thing about our culturally osmosed value system when it comes to bias and nepotism and favoritism. I'm trying to just suss that out a little bit and realize that in some places, that's very distinctively right, wrong, very easy, but in other places, it's maybe a little bit more ambiguous. I'm trying to suss that out a little bit before we get into this passage that I think is going to clang and clash and clatter with what we think our modern sensibilities ought to be morally when it comes to showing favoritism or extra care to people in our own family over just random people everywhere. Here's the passage. That's quite the setup. Ready? Galatians 6, I'm just going to read 6 through 10. You'll notice as I'm reading this that everything but the last phrase, you're going to go like, it's tough love from the Apostle Paul here in Galatians, but he's right about all of it. I'd have to admit until you get to the last phrase, and then it's, wait, what do I do with that? Here we go. Anyone who receives instruction in the word must share all good things with his instructor. Don't be deceived. God can't be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Okay, Paul, that's tough, but okay. The one who sows to please his sinful nature, from that nature will reap destruction. The one who sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Okay, well, it's a little binary, Paul, but you've backed it up well, and I guess it makes sense even if you are being very direct. Let us not become weary in doing good. Okay, that's a good one, Paul. We shouldn't become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Yeah, I like reaping a harvest. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. I mean, that's a really nice passage, isn't it? Where was the bias in there? Oh, wait a second. There's something here at the end. I'm using a different Bible today. This one was by a work site. It's all covered in sawdust and a bunch of debris. It looks like there's something else written here right at the end of that phrase in Galatians 6:10. Let me see if I can get this cleaned up. I've got a little brush here. Well, what have we here? There's a comma, folks. There's a comma after the nice sentence. It's not a sentence after all. It's just the first half of a sentence. It says, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, comma, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. Ba, ba, ba. Feels weird, doesn't it? Is the Bible teaching, actually, for reals, that Christians should be good to everyone? Great, I think we all agree with that. But extra good to other Christians? Well, the short answer to that question is yes, that is what the Bible is clearly teaching. That is what Paul is clearly saying. But that does feel kind of weird to us, doesn't it? Doesn't it feel like the thing you're supposed to do morally as a Christian or just a good citizen in general is to keep it even, like really fair with everybody? I don't know. How does that work out practically? I guess maybe you should have some kind of ledger, maybe a little notebook. Like I've got this old TMBH. Ooh, this is the Matthew notebook. I've got this old TMBH Matthew notebook here from several years ago. Maybe I could just scratch out Matthew on the cover and write how much good things I do for everybody, and to make sure I keep it totally even for everybody notebook on the cover. And then maybe what I ought to do to keep it fair is I should just write down every good thing I do. That seems like a very healthy exercise. And as I do that, then I can just sort of, do an analysis of each person I did a good thing for and just figure out exactly who they are and how to categorize them. And then if I ever get too far ahead doing nice things for this type of person or that type of person, or people who don't have a lot of money or do have a lot of money, people who live in this town or that town, men, women, if I ever discover that I'm just not being fair, I could just do more good things to make it more fair. And maybe the most basic category I could keep track of is Christians and not Christians. I could just ask people every time I do something nice for you. Excuse me, ma'am, you might notice I just held the door for you. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not satisfied at all and 10 being very satisfied, how satisfied are you right now with my Christian service? 8. Excellent. Thank you. And now I've just got a few quick demographic questions for you. What's your highest level of completed education? Yeah, thank you. And approximate household income? Wonderful. Number of children? Great. And current employment status? Wonderful. Rent or own? Thank you so much. And finally, the last question. Thanks for bearing with me. Christian or non-Christian? Non-Christian. Wonderful. Based on this experience with 1 being very unlikely and 10 being very likely, how likely are you to consider becoming a Christian now? The point is, it's laughable and stupid. I don't know how I would actually keep track of this, but also sometimes you use absurdity to demonstrate absurd points. And one of the absurd points that I think I've just sort of culturally osmosified into my brain and my ethical system is this idea that I need to do exactly an equal amount of fairness and nice things and good things for everybody all the time, when the Bible seems to say, dang right, you should do good to all people. Also, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. I've made a couple of easy, cheap little jokes here about the difficulty, the implausibility of really, truly keeping track and quantifying this to make sure it's all fair. But joking aside, this is a thread I want to pull on more, because even though I've read this book and therefore this phrase many times, I just spaced it. I don't remember that it taught this. So how does that work? What does it look like? And maybe what I'm most curious about is, what would the thinking be behind that? If you're the kind of person who keeps track of things like this, obviously we're out of time for today, so we'll pull on that thread I was mentioning more next time around. All right, that's good for now. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.